The March 19th Ohio primary is almost here. Ahead on Face the State, former President Donald Trump is the presumptive Republican nominee after his final challenger, Nikki Haley, dropped out of the race. Now a November showdown with President Biden looms. We'll look at what the race being settled early means for Ohio's presidential primary, plus the pressing issues on the minds of young voters. Also, the top of the ticket race for U.S. Senate in Ohio. The three Republican candidates stood side by side for a recent final debate. They're back and forth on the big issues. Plus, an Ohio mayor's eye-opening and unforgettable trip to war-torn Ukraine. The memories he brought home with him. Ahead on Face the State. Thanks for joining us for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. Ohioans head to the polls March 19th for the presidential primary. It's basically all settled now that Nikki Haley has dropped out, making former President Trump the presumptive Republican nominee. He'll face President Biden in November. However, if you select a Republican primary ballot, you'll be able to vote for presidential candidates besides former President Trump. We're going to show you part of a sample ballot from Franklin County. You can still vote for Ron DeSantis, Chris Christie, Vivek Ramaswamy, or Nikki Haley, even though those four have all dropped out of the race. But in the Republican primary, Ohio is a winner-take-all state. That means whoever wins will get all 79 of Ohio's delegates at the national convention. And according to the polls, Trump is expected to get all of those delegates. Besides President, one of the biggest races voters are deciding is who will be the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate in Ohio. State Senator Matt Dolan, Secretary of State Frank LaRose, and businessman Bernie Moreno are seeking the Republican nomination. The winner of the primary will challenge three-term incumbent Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown in the November general election. Dolan, LaRose, and Moreno recently took center stage in their final debate before the primary. Matt Dolan, Bernie Moreno, and Frank LaRose sprinkled barbs at each other throughout the 60-minute debate at Miami University.
My opponents are reinventing themselves for their political interest.
Shocking to me that Mr. Moreno supported policies like that in the past.
He's a very silly man.
But largely focused on their stances on the issues, including securing the southern border.
3 military divisions could secure the border. They don't need to be there all that long, 8 months, maybe 12, until the wall can be completed. We must make it clear that if you are here illegally, you will be deported.
If you cross into the country illegally, you are immediately returned. You aren't arrested, you're not detained, you're just immediately returned, and you forfeit your right to make that asylum claim for life.
And I am the only one in this race who's called for securing and sealing the border, which means we are temporarily closing the border to immigration because we need to build a wall. We need to get technology. We need to give our Border Patrol more authority to act.
All three Republicans bill themselves as pro-life, but have varying stances on abortion.
Let's get to a 15-week standard where after 15 weeks, there are some common sense restrictions so that in this country, the greatest country on earth, we don't have elective late-term abortions.
But I have never deviated from the fact that we need to have 3 exceptions: life of the mother, rape, and incest.
We need to be supportive of women that are making difficult choices to make sure that they can make those life-affirming choices, like having a child and giving that child up for adoption. We also need to make sure that the cost of starting a family isn't so prohibitive for people.
And with prices of so many things, like groceries, still high, they also have different ideas on how to help people with the everyday cost of living.
What we need to do in Washington is what we've done here in Ohio, and that's put more money in the taxpayers' pockets. That means helping small businesses.
We need to cut taxes, streamline regulations. We need to be not just energy independent, but energy dominant. That means drill for oil, drill for gas, mine for coal.
We have to unleash the engine of prosperity, which is our marketplace. We have to make certain that we have a regulatory environment that doesn't crush businesses.
And joining me now to discuss the Senate and presidential races is University of Cincinnati political science professor Dr. David Niven. David, thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, first of all, just what's your sense of how the Senate race is playing out heading into the primary?
I think the difficulty for these three candidates, and you heard a little bit that just a moment ago, is they're very similar on most issues. Line up and say very much the same things, very much the same sentiments. So they're really scrambling to distinguish themselves from each other. It's not an easy thing to do when you agree with your opponent and you basically want the same things.
More nuances between them.
It's nuances, and that's probably why the Trump endorsement is going to be the most significant single thing about the race. There's just not that much between these candidates. So what distinguishes them, in the Republican, primary voters' mind?
And Mr. Marino certainly does play on that as well. He mentioned it several times once again in the debate.
He should be a broken record on that. It's in his ads, it's in the debates. It's the sole reason why he stands out from the other two. And one of the things we've seen in the polls is an awful lot of Ohioans don't know anything about any of them. And so that's really what this race comes down to.
So what do you think of the tone of this campaign?
It's gotten a little silly, a little childish, because they have so little between them. If they had real distinctions, it'd be a lot easier to have, a kind of a serious debate about the issues if they really wanted to take the country in a different way. But, as you heard, it's three different variations of, walls or troops or, lasers at the border. They're all in the same place on issues. They all want a national abortion ban, with nuances of exactly how they would implement it, but they're in the same place.
So the winner of this race will square off against three-term incumbent Democrat Sherrod Brown in November. What do you think will be the key issue or issues once, whoever it is that comes out of the Republican primary taking on Sherrod Brown? What's the key issue, do you think?
Well, I think for the Republicans, they hope to ride that, coattails of Republican success. No Republican has lost a statewide race, in Ohio in the last decade, except the Republicans facing Sherrod Brown. So, they're looking to ride on that. I think the difficulty they're going to have is Brown is relentlessly focused on workers and the economy, and I think he'll look to put distance between his presentation and theirs. And I think they're unknowns relative to Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown is universally known, so they're going to work to be as little destructive to the already advantageous situation Republicans have.
They also seem to bring up they think that abortion is also going to be a big issue because of the stark contrast between Sherrod Brown and their positions.
Well, I think a couple of things about abortion. One, Ohio voters have shown, absolutely what side they are on the issue. So it's going to be difficult for the Republican nominee to sell the idea that you Ohioans just voted to enshrine reproductive rights in the state constitution, but we want to overrule that at the federal level. That's going to be a hard sell. The other thing about abortion that's interesting is if you look at the counties that voted for reproductive rights in November, it's pretty much a blueprint for counties that Sherrod Brown could compete for and win. That is basically the path to the way a Democrat wins. For example, every county from Toledo to the Pennsylvania border voted yes on reproductive rights. Those used to be Democratic-based counties. If Brown keeps them in the fold, that's a path to victory.
So how important is this race nationally and, for the makeup of the Senate?
Well, nationally, this is probably the #1 Senate race in the country. And, Ohioans are used to being the center of the universe in presidential campaigns. We're not that anymore.
This year, yeah.
But we are going to be the center of the universe in a Senate campaign. And you're seeing numbers, both parties talking about hundreds of millions of dollars going into this race. $500 million is the potential total in a Senate race. I mean, this is going to be a saturation campaign on both sides.
So moving now to the presidential race and our primary, as you mentioned, Ohio is used to being, a really important state in the presidential races. This one was settled really early. We know it's going to be Trump v. Biden. How does that impact, in your mind, our Ohio primary in terms of interest?
Right. It's not a good thing in terms of getting turnout. I mean, certainly the presidential is the marquee race and the thing that brings people out. So when we have a competitive presidential primary, we get more voters. It's going to put a lot more pressure on those Senate candidates on the Republican side to identify people and get them to the polls. On both sides, these are symbolic votes. This is not really, at this point, this is not really about choosing a presidential nominee for voters. It's really, showing sort of, the flag for your team at this moment.
Do you recall a race for president being set this early? Is it common? Right after Super Tuesday?
I mean, to be set on both sides is what's extraordinary. It's not uncommon, incumbent presidents, almost always, have this thing wrapped up before it gets started. But to have it settled on both sides is really pretty extraordinary. And the extra irony is, even though it's settled in terms of the vote, it's not really settled until those conventions happen. If either of these candidates, for any reason, isn't ready to accept the nomination, those delegates could go another way and choose a different nominee.
Let's talk about, let's do a little civics lesson, I suppose. Republican voters, as I mentioned earlier, will find 5 presidential candidates on their ballot. And people can vote for any of them. So can you explain how that system on the Republican side works? Sure.
The way the Republicans do it, it's just one statewide vote. Whoever gets the most votes gets all those delegates. And so, they want to make it a pretty cut and dried result. If you can win the state, even if you won the state with 25% of the vote, you'd get 100% of those delegates. So in a competitive election, this is why you're seeing, Nikki Haley, for example, in South Carolina, did not do well at all and wound up with almost no delegates even in her home state, because the way the Republicans apportion those delegates is very much oriented toward, let's get this over with and call somebody a winner.
So if somebody has already with early voting or still wants to vote for those other candidates, what would have to happen for that candidate not to accept those votes?
Right. So, the way it works in Ohio, you can suspend a campaign. You can say you don't want to run anymore. But if your name's still on the ballot and you haven't officially withdrawn your candidacy, if you haven't written to, the Secretary of State and withdrawn, then your votes count. So there won't be any kind of like marker next to Chris Christie's name saying, this person is not actually a candidate. So this is very different. Down ballot, you'll find there are going to be a handful of candidates who've dropped out after the petition period, and you'll get like a little notice if you go in and vote saying that those votes don't count.
So you'll get that on that,
right,
on voting day.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter this year, I guess, but you mentioned the differences. What's the difference on the Democratic side for the president?
The Democrats reward winning congressional districts. So in Ohio, across Ohio's 15 congressional districts, if we had, for example, a candidate win 5 of those districts and another candidate win 10, it's not a winner-take-all system. You would reward those successes at the local level. And the big difference is, in a competitive election, of course, the big difference is, it's a little bit more, inclusive. It would recognize somebody who won, say, 1/3 of the votes is going to walk away with delegates in the Democratic system. The Republican system, they would typically get nothing at all.
And Republican, it's winner take all. All right. Dr. David Niven, University of Cincinnati, thank you so much for your knowledge and sharing the analysis this morning.
Always a pleasure.
All right. Take care. Well, still ahead on Face the State, what issues are important to young voters, those still in school looking to start their careers and the rest of their lives? We'll hear from a couple of them next. Welcome back to Face the State. Much has been made of the ages of the 2 presidential candidates. President Biden is 81, former President Trump is 77. I wanted to go to the other end of the spectrum and hear what's on the minds of some politically active young voters. Joining me now are Katie Sewer, a 3rd-year political science and strategic communications major at Ohio State, and Cassidy Nelson is in her 2nd year studying public health and political science. They both are members of the College Democrats at The Ohio State University. First of all, welcome to Face the State. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us.
So first of all, as younger voters, first of all, Katie, for you, what do you think of the ages of the presidential candidates?
So honestly, I don't think much of the ages of the presidential candidates. I think what I've been hearing on campus and what I personally believe is that we're more focused on the issues. So, we look at these guys and we see one guy who wants to, he literally said it last night, protect reproductive rights and pass reproductive rights federally, and we see one guy who wants to ban abortion everywhere. And, with what Ohio voters voted for and how Ohio students voted for issue 1 in November, the choice is pretty clear.
And how about for you, as far as the age question, Cassidy?
I would say the same thing. I'm more worried about the issues, that the ages, it's not really a big deal. Reproductive rights is very big with us, and we obviously think that despite their age, we really care about the issues that these candidates hold, and yeah.
So Cassidy, for you, how old were you when you got interested in politics?
I was about 16, so halfway through high school.
Yeah, and that's still carrying over now. What keeps you interested, or why do you want to be politically active?
Definitely just the issues. I definitely think, like with College Democrats at Ohio State, we do a lot with educating college students about the issues and, meeting representatives and senators. And so that's just really big for us.
And learning the process as well,
Yeah.
and what it takes to govern. And how about for you, Katie? How old were you when you started, finding an interest in politics?
I was in 8th grade. It was right when Trump was elected. And I just remember watching the Women's March and all the protests, when he did the Muslim ban and all those protests. And I just remember seeing people who were like my age or looked like me really standing up and fighting back. That's what really got me into politics. And what keeps me here is, like Cassidy said, the issues, absolutely, but also seeing our young people, especially our College Democrats members, engage in politics and getting to create those moments where maybe someone has never had a representative they feel like speaks for them before, and then they come to Ohio State, and then all of a sudden they get to meet somebody. That's what also keeps me in there.
And also, do you feel it's important, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, to be involved in the system?
Oh, I think you should absolutely be involved no matter what party you are. I think it's up to all of us to, take a really active stance on the issues. Young people have always been the ones who are really working to change the country no matter what side they're on. So I think no matter what side you're on, it's absolutely important to be engaged.
You've mentioned some of the social issues both of you have. How about other issues? What stands out to you that you want to hear candidates talk about outside of perhaps the reproductive rights that you've talked about?
So obviously everyone talks about the economy, it's the economy, stupid. And I think for younger voters, we want to hear our candidates talk a lot about jobs, because I personally, and I know many of my friends in College Democrats, we want to stay in Ohio. We love it here, but there might not be jobs waiting for us. And so I think that's something that young people are really interested in.
How about for you, Cassie?
For me, it'd be affordable healthcare. As a public health major, we talk a lot about health insurance, and it's definitely something that is a growing concern. I know President Biden recently set a cap on the cost of insulin, and so just stuff like that, making healthcare more affordable at the state and national level.
Mm-hmm. So, as you're a second year, so you've got a little ways to go before you enter the job market. What is maybe one of your big concerns as you look ahead to that next step?
I probably want to stay in Columbus, and obviously the cost of living is increasing. So just being able to get out of college, go to graduate school, and still be able to afford it.
So you have a longer term education plan too?
Yeah, I want to go to law school. So.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. How about for you, Katie, in terms of, what are the concerns? You're a year ahead of Cassidy right now. What are you thinking about as far as what concerns you about your next step in life?
Well, I think affordable housing is always something that is on the mind. I really like it here in Columbus, and I really want to stay, but obviously I want to make sure that there's a place for me to live that, is on an entry-level salary is okay. And then another thing I'm thinking about a lot is I have lots of friends like Cassidy and other people who are like public health, political science, and biology majors, lots of folks who want to be doctors. And right now with the attacks on trans kids in the state, the attacks continuing on abortion in the state, some of them don't feel like they can practice here, and that's really sad. And I don't want them to leave because they're my friends, but I also want them to stay because they are incredibly talented people, and I want to make sure we retain them. So making sure we retain that talent is really important.
On the flip side of that coin, then, what do you see perhaps as the opportunities that exist here that you'll be able to go after?
Definitely. So I think Columbus and Ohio as a whole is really growing. We have the Intel plant coming in. I think that's going to create a ton of new jobs in like engineering fields that are really, kind of require those advanced degrees. I think Columbus, we talk about affordable housing. We do need to make sure we keep an eye on that, but it still is, compared to like New York, affordable.
Yeah.
So I think that's something, and I think the university is really something that is an opportunity here. I mean, there are so many people I know who are recent grads who are like, oh, I'm from New Jersey, I'm from New York, and I came here to go to Ohio State and didn't leave. And so I think we need to make sure we're sort of harnessing that talent and giving them a reason to stay.
And how about for you, Cassidy? What excites you about the possibilities in the future?
Definitely staying in Columbus. OSU Law School is amazing, and if you're interested in politics, there's a lot going on. We have, the state capitol. So of course, just staying here, hopefully with affordable housing. But basically everything Katie said, hoping all of my friends can also stay here and want to stay here. with that being said, obviously the attack on reproductive rights and trans rights is definitely a concern. So, yeah.
But economically speaking, you're hoping both to stay here and make a life?
I would say so.
Yeah. And so we just have a couple seconds left, but what's your focus over the next 2 years in terms of school and then beyond?
Oh my goodness, that's a big question. So definitely graduating, passing all my classes, but I'm really focused on, the 2024 election, getting our college Dems members engaged, getting them ready to go. We see every time we do an event with Senator Brown that our members are super fired up and have so much energy. So just harnessing that energy, making sure that they are ready to hit the doors and win this state back for Sherrod Brown.
And how about for you, Cass?
Yeah, definitely in the next 2 years. This year is a very important year in Ohio. Obviously in the primaries, but as we get into November, we have a lot of Supreme Court seats up for grabs, and we're really hoping the Democrats can flip the court in Ohio, and just really focusing on getting the college Democrats engaged, and then obviously going to law school when I graduate.
You got a lot on your plate for sure as college students, but thank you both for sharing your insight and ideas and opinions on where the country is and the issues that are important to you. So thanks for coming in today.
Definitely. Thanks again
Yes,
for
thank you
having us.
You're very welcome. Well, still ahead on Face the State, an unforgettable experience for an Ohio mayor in a war zone. Hear about the memories he brought back from Ukraine that will stick with him forever.
Heartbreaking thing for me as an American being over there and getting to be eyes on the ground.
The mayor of Athens, Ohio, Steve Patterson, recently got back from a trip to Ukraine. He was there for 8 days, partnering with an organization that works with the U.S. Agency for International Development. During his time there, air raid sirens went off while he was getting ready to talk with students at a university. Patterson says seeing the effects of the war firsthand was emotional for him. 10 TV's Tara Jabbour talked with Patterson about his unforgettable trip.
The air raid sirens went off and we ended up having to continue our engagement in an air raid shelter.
Steve Patterson says for him, the sheltering was a lot of unknown, but for the students there, it was routine.
For them, this has become an everyday or every other day occurrence over in Ukraine, to where their lives are disrupted by having to shelter underground.
He spent about an hour in the shelter, and while they weren't hit at that time, he did worry about hearing the sirens blare again.
It certainly weighed on my mind while I was over there. It weighed on my mind often when I was going to sleep at night, because the air raid sirens can go off at any time.
He says seeing the strength of the Ukrainian people was special.
They love their country and they will do anything to defend their country.
Patterson says one thing he kept hearing over and over during his trip was that people were thankful for the U.S.'s funding to aid those in Ukraine.
Extremely appreciative, stating that, that this would have gone in a very different direction had the U.S. not helped in the way that they had. But they would also like to see continued funding coming to their war effort.
He's sharing his story about Ukraine to lawmakers in D.C. in March, encouraging them to continue sending money overseas. When he came back to the U.S., he couldn't get the struggle of the Ukrainian people out of his mind.
It was hard. I was pretty emotional, to where I just keep thinking about what they're having to deal with, the challenges that they have to work their way through day after day.
Tara Jabbour, 10 TV News.
Mayor Patterson says he plans to visit Ukraine again later in the summer. Thank you for joining me this week for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. I'll see you again next Sunday at 11:30.